It's Tuesday, April 15th, 2014, and you're listening to SYN Boldly, the podcast of the Sign Your Name Project. I'm your host, Trey Comstock. With me this week is the usual cast of characters. We have Miss Kathleen Royston.
Hello.
And Mr. Stephen Dallas.
Hey.
On tonight's episode, it is all about a game of brinksmanship. A side within the Methodist Church's never-ending inclusion debate is on the brink of taking their toys and going home and finding a fascinating way to take more of their toys with them than we thought possible. That will be our discussion and our news story tonight, and we'll start with the news portion in, guess what? It's called The News. So, news is loosely defined here, in that this is by no means the latest news coming out of Methodist polity, as what we're about to report on occurred on March 28th. But we've been kind of off covering other things, and so to kind of bring it back around to one of our core issues, the self-described Wesleyan Orthodox or Evangelical Renewal movement within the United Methodist Church, that they call themselves, good news, their board met on March 28th and issued a statement. That statement, and I'll read a portion of it here. At their board meeting ending March 28th, 2014, Good News staff and board members discussed at length the present reality. Many of our bishops are unwilling to enforce the Book of Discipline and the covenant we agreed to live by. Widespread disregard of that covenant, the will of the General Conference, and the Council's own promise in 2012 to uphold the Book of Discipline demonstrates the deep division and conflicting worldviews existing within the United Methodist Church. We see at present the situation as untenable. To skip down a little bit, if we are one church, we cannot act as if we are two. If in reality we are two churches, it may not be wise to pretend any longer that we are one. So there are two things happening here, and an interview that I read between Tim Lambeck and United Methodist Reporter kind of confirms some of this. The basic thing that's happening here is Good News and the kind of self-described Orthodox and Evangelical wing in the United Methodist Church is edging towards leaving the church. Rather than trying to push out those that they view as breaking discipline, they are now talking about leaving themselves and setting up a situation where they could take some of the church property with them because the church broke its covenant. See, that's the big change. Is one of the big issues with division in the first place and creating two churches out of what is currently one is who gets the china in the divorce. And what Good News is trying to set up here is that they can keep some of that stuff. So one of the things that that United Methodist Reporter asked Lambeck was this. There has been speculation that the language of the statement, which I just read, which talks about the unwillingness of the bishops to enforce the Book of Discipline and the quote-unquote covenant we live by, is a setup towards a breach of contract argument for the courts as a possible path for allowing conservatives to leave while retaining church property. Has Good News considered a strategy based around a breach of contract argument? Lambeck responds, "We do not believe the preferred way forward is through the secular court system. Instead, we will look to the General Conference to provide an equitable resolution to this conflict. Resorting to secular courts would be an extreme last resort. We do, however, believe that the trust clause is designed to protect the United Methodist doctrine, not simply control of property."
Nope.
Churches and clergy who abandon United Methodist doctrine are violating the trust clause just as much as congregations who leave the denomination.
Nope.
So you see the setup here. Because the bishops are failing to uphold the covenant, now they have gone against the trust clause, making it viable to take some of the property with them. Your thoughts, ladies and gentlemen?
Well, it depends on what your definition of is. Well, actually, what your definition of
Thank you, Bill.
covenant is. It depends on, if they do decide to go to the secular court, which, let's be honest, secular court, the court system, which, let's be honest, is
the court system of the United States of America.
So secular, Satan-filled court system or whatever it is. There's going to be a big discussion as whether or not a covenant can be a legally binding contract. When you are married, it is, some churches say that that's a covenant, but you still have to sign a legal document, your marriage license, which is a contract, stating that you two become one, as the Spice Girls song tells us. And as for the trust clause, in that...
Can we define what the trust clause is?
The trust clause, and in layman's terms, which I am a very layman, lay person's turn.
He is a layman.
I am a layman. I'm sorry.
He is a layman.
Yes, I am.
Yes, but the term applies to all people. It's not just the... Anyway, just be inclusive in your language or I'll punch you in the face, Doss.
That's not very inclusive. Anyway, in lay person's language, it's basically saying that the property that your local congregation sits on, so let's just pull one out of the sky, First United Methodist Church in Columbiana, Alabama. Buildings paid for and all that stuff, mortgage paid for, blah, 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 blah. That is not yours. That is held in trust. That is basically, you are a tenant of that to the United Methodist Church. So when you leave, it's just like, kind of sort of like renting an apartment. When you leave, you can't take the apartment with you. When you leave the Methodist Church as a congregation, you can't take the building with you. And they went to the Supreme Court about it, and they said, no, the trust clause is valid. And so the United Methodist Church owns all the property of the United Methodist Church. If you leave, you can't take it with you unless they say, sure, go ahead.
But it's up to them to grant that.
Yes.
And this is true of other churches, and has been an issue in the Episcopal Church, with congregations that have broken off, either to join the Catholics or the more conservative wing that stands with the African bishops in the Episcopal Church. These same things have come up, and in the end, the church body owns those buildings, not the local congregations, assuming there is a denominational structure. Of course, in the case of the Southern Baptist Convention and other things like that, those are individually organized congregations that happen to be loosely affiliated.
Yeah.
But we are not a loosely affiliated system. We in the United Methodist Church are a connectional system with strong denominational oversight.
Yep.
So the whole idea here is it used to be that they were trying to push folks out, and now they are talking about leaving. What do you guys think are the implications for this?
Can we go back to the part about the trust clause and doctrine? Can we talk about that?
Yeah,
for a
I mean,
minute?
this is a totally obviously like a totally unique interpretation, that the trust clause was basically the contract that's being made, as long as y'all uphold doctrine, then y'all own the property, but when y'all break doctrine, then the property's up in the air.
Because my understanding of the trust clause is historically it was just a very pragmatic kind of thing.
Well, we're a really pragmatic organization.
Kind of people, right? And so because of, I'm not sure that the intent of the trust clause was ever to keep everybody on the same page doctrinally.
No, it wasn't.
I would almost argue that within the Wesleyan tradition there is a good deal of flexibility on certain issues. So I think that that's a very interesting move to say that this very sort of legal, practical, historical thing is about enforcing what they perceive as orthodoxy.
Right.
Which I think is also up for grabs.
Well, I think they do something interesting with this idea of orthodoxy. What Lambic especially seems to imply in his article, in his interview with UMR, is that there's this sense that the progressive approach to the Bible leads to many issues of doctrine. For instance, the bodily resurrection of Christ, or other things of that nature, not just our interpretation along the lines of LGBTQ inclusion.
I have long, and I don't know if I've railed against this on this show, but I certainly have other places in my life, and I'll do it again. Progressive is not the opposite of orthodox, y'all. That there are particularly I think in many mainline Protestant denominations, people who are very progressive on social issues and also orthodox. I believe in the bodily resurrection, which is a very, I believe in the eschaton, maybe not in the Left Behind kind of way. In fact, because I'm Orthodox, I don't believe it in the Left Behind kind of way. And so that sort of these, like, I believe in original sin. I mean, these are like Orthodox positions that I hold, but it's almost because of them that I am socially progressive. And so I think that is a false dichotomy that they are setting up, which I find that very frustrating. So there we go. You can be Orthodox and progressive.
Right. And I think, certainly for me, I look to folks like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, where, or even Karl Barth, that this is a push towards orthodoxy in terms of our theological approach to atonement, or towards, the meaning of Christ, and these kind of things. But that doesn't have to mean a turn away from loving people who appear different. That orthodox and traditional social values are not actually the same thing. Right. And actually, Jesus would have been considered wildly unorthodox for his time.
Well, by this definition.
By this definition. Because he contravened many social conventions. The saying, one of the core theses that I read in the life and ministry of Christ, rather than just focusing on the atonement, is, hey, all of these categories that we have that say, like, you're in and you're out, screw them. Yeah. Like, there's something else happening here, and let's talk about that.
But categories make me feel comfortable, and I like knowing that...
But it certainly is part of human psychology to categorize.
Well, and what we've said before, and I think it bears repeating, is that a lot of what's going on with the debate over inclusion is a problem of, what do we do with Scripture? Mm-hmm. How do we view Scripture? What is our understanding of Scripture? And
they agree. And they
what
agree
is the
that
authority?
This is the
right.
issue.
What is the authority of Scripture? And I think the idea of sort of post-Enlightenment biblical inerrancy, like what we think of is, if we think of it, Scripture being inerrant in that sort of 18th century and later sense, that, like, in order for it to have validity, it has to be directly divinely inspired and without error, which I wonder if they would agree with that assessment. It certainly seems that that's sort of where their argument ends up. But that's not always how Scripture has been used. And so I think it's in the same vein of sort of melding certain social values, certain cultural social values, also throwing in a relatively recent understanding of how Scripture functions.
But also, it does seem to come down that if they're going to take this stance on LGBTQ inclusion, then they need to take that stance on, ordination of female pastors.
Yep. Absolutely.
Now, I'm obviously not arguing for the end of that thing, but if you're going to take it this way, you have to be totally consistent. You also then possibly have to start arguing against this establishment of slavery. If you're going to take it this way, that Scripture is inerrant, okay, it's inerrant. It's inerrant in this specific way, that it can only mean one thing, and it can only mean what it's kind of always meant. Okay, fine, but understand what you give up, and understand the consistency. It drives me insane.
Do you think? Well, okay, I'm going to be honest, and I've done a fair amount of research on this particular group within the United Methodist Church. I haven't seen a lot of, if any, female voices.
I mean, Rob Renfro's wife is often.
I haven't seen any female clergy voices. Not that there aren't any.
I like how,
but they have not been prominent.
I like how when you said there's not many female voices, he went through. He didn't say Rob Renfro's wife's name. I don't actually
know her name.
He just said, "Well, Rob Renfro's wife."
I don't actually.
That should tell you something right there.
and I do wonder, if there is a decision to leave, if they will have. I mean, I think that if you make this argument that you really do, female ordination is out. And that's something I find...
You have to be you can't be remarried to be an elder if we go that far, because as it says in the rules for elders in Corinthians,
right,
they must be husbands to one wife.
Right. And it gets complicated, but I wanted to. I found a key quote in talking about them leaving. So this is reporter asks, in the past you have seemed to say that those who disagree with the current stance of the Book of Discipline should leave the church. The latest statement seems to suggest that biblical Orthodox members and churches, using their words again. They're deliberately using their words,
okay,
may be considering leaving instead. Is this a change from your original position? Lambic responds, in terms of what might be proposed by biblical Orthodox groups, a variety of options are on the table. It makes the most sense that those who cannot live with the teaching of the church ought to be the ones to leave, and we who want to make that possible graciously and generously. If that is not possible, a separation of the church into two entities, one Orthodox and the other progressive, might make the most sense. We are not at this time advocating for biblical Orthodox members and churches to leave the denomination, but that may become necessary in the future. So this isn't totally a change, because Rob Renfro was essentially saying this exact thing to us at General Conference. In more coded language, but he was basically saying, look, if y'all pass this, we'll leave. And he didn't say will. He'll say, many conservative folks will leave if y'all pass some of the more radical legislation that was proposed at General Conference.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the Slaughter-Hamilton bit that was like, hey, we agree to disagree, although they shot that down too.
Right.
So this isn't necessarily new, but this is certainly an escalation of their language of, this is untenable, we might be out of here soon. So, kind of transitioning a little bit, we've talked a little bit about their statement, and kind of what's implied in their statement is basically like, hey, we should probably be two churches. And so this idea of us being two churches is tonight's discussion. So we've talked about this some before, but what are y'all thoughts on this idea of it becoming two churches, one Orthodox and one progressive? Using the words of Lambic.
Let's not use their words, because that makes me feel icky. That makes me feel bad, because I'm progressive, but I'm also very Orthodox. And so let's change the conversation right there, and let's move it to let's do what's a good word? Anyway, I think at some point it has to happen. I don't want it to happen because I like the United Methodist Church, and I like how majority on both sides can come together on some very real issues that, aren't the LGBTQ issue that's facing the church today, like immigration reform and poverty and women's rights and, all sorts of stuff. And they can come together and they can work well, and it's just this one issue where they're like, hey, we agree to disagree, and we don't need an amendment for that. However, at some point, the people who yell the loudest get the most attention, and it can't sustain itself anymore. And ultimately, there's just... I don't know how to say this without making it sound like, yes, we should split completely right now, and everyone should go their own way. But, ultimately, if it can't sustain itself, if it becomes, for lack of a better word, an impotent body, which, let's be honest, let's look at General Conference. Do you know what got passed? Jack Patui.
Quite literally nothing to do with inclusion or anything else.
Yeah.
Very little change.
Very little change. So it's not doing anything anymore. The church isn't doing anything anymore in its current state. And everyone's like, oh, if it splits, the church will die. It's not going to die.
It'll change.
It's going to smooth. The only way to build muscle is to get rid of something. And so if you want a strong church on either side, you've got to... It has to happen. Sorry, guys and ladies.
I'm not... Okay. I don't want the church to split.
Yeah.
I don't want that. I don't wake up in the morning and be like, yay, schism! I mean, that's not how that goes.
We'll get on the front page of the religion section of the New York Times.
But it feels a little bit inevitable at this point. But I also think one of the things that I do want to say is what I love so much about being a Wesleyan is throughout J-Dub's life, he responded to changing contexts. And so he remained engaged with what was changing in people's lives and the stories that people told him and letters that they sent. And a lot of his theological development comes from responding to what's actually going on in people's lives, and particularly to their stories. And that methodology, so Wesley does not, he changes his mind more than a few times.
Yep.
And by the end of his life, it's a lot more open. And so I think that methodology of the people called Methodists is really important to me. What does it mean to be able to change our theological understanding based on changing contexts and based on other people's stories? And I think if we ever are backed into a corner where we can't do that institutionally, something needs to change. And that's a little bit what I feel like is going on here, is there are things that we cannot do as a church. There are people we cannot reach as a church because of this stance. I also don't think, I think ideally what it would look like for me is staying together with the understanding that we would ordain gay clergy and marry gay couples, but if there were ever pastors who were really did not feel comfortable doing that, or there were contexts where that would not be appropriate, that's a battle we could fight later. So I think that
that's essentially what the ELCA has
right,
now.
Yeah.
Exactly. And y'all, we're behind, the Lutherans beat us there? Who saw that coming? So I love the ELCA. They're so great. But that's kind of where I stand on it. And I understand that's a little bit more of a congregationalist approach than the United Methodist Church may be. But I think on something like this, that may help smooth things out a little bit.
And that's one of the wonderful things about the appointment system is, you can say yes, we ordain
lady pastors.
Lady pastors.
Well, right now, I think there are churches.
But right now, there's churches in various conferences where they shouldn't put a female pastor. You made me say lady pastor. They shouldn't put a female pastor because it's we're not ready for that yet.
No, and I think there are points where you sort of force the issue a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think for a first step,
made me say lady pastor.
I did make you say lady pastor, yes. But I think that there's for a first step, that's a good one that doesn't involve people taking their toys and going.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure. I think that my understanding of the Good News folks is that they're so convinced that this is the only way. I'm not sure that level of wishy-washiness would really
They may
fly.
not be convinced that it's the only way, but they are certainly convinced that it's the right way, that it's the...
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
The language that they're
orthodoxy.
Oh, yeah.
Right
Okay. It is the
belief.
only way and the right way.
The language that they're around is the language of orthodoxy and the language of right belief. And that basically and one of the things that kind of was driven home to me in discussions at General Conference was that to them any change constitutes an 100% about face, right? So it's allowed in some cases that's 100% worse than it being allowed in no cases.
Yeah.
Right.
And for them, some cases, even if it's not all cases, constitutes grounds for leaving.
And I think that, at least from where I sit, I have to wonder if some progressives are more willing to compromise.
Well, fundamentally...
That's what progressives
that's
do.
the-
I was trying to be diplomatic. My gosh.
But fundamentally, that's the strength and the weakness of progressivism and the Democratic Party and the political system.
Yeah.
Is we're really good at being a big tent. And so often, that's great. But then you have, in the Democratic Party, it's also why it fails to govern when it's in Congress.
Yeah.
Because it's really hard for, that's great. That's great.
Let's reach a compromise. Let's do this. Whereas other sides are like, no, it's my way or the highway. If
Right.
you don't want this, you get kicked out.
Well, and I mean, I don't know about y'all, but I've run into this in local churches too, is people who tend to be on the more conservative end of things want everybody else to change so they're like them. And so the progressives usually are the ones who take their toys and go elsewhere. Like
Right.
in local
in local churches,
if you're in a Methodist church in the South and stuff's getting too conservative, you're not going to be like, we're going to do more, like more liberal stuff. You go
sleep.
to
You
the
go-
Episcopal church down the street.
No, you go, well, that's them, and I understand that that's their perspective, but I have a different perspective, and so I'm going to find a place where I can express my perspective.
yeah.
I mean, to a certain extent, this is getting a little theoretical, but it's a modern worldview versus a postmodern worldview, right? So a modern worldview says there's a right answer that I can prove empirically.
Yeah.
A postmodern worldview says there are many worldviews that are valid. I think mine is valid. Yours might be valid too.
Right.
And I often feel like this debate about scripture and this debate about inclusion and this debate about splitting, and I have to credit Dr. Burkholder of Emory University for planting the seed in my head, but that this is somewhat of a conflict of a modern versus a postmodern worldview. And, I mean, I guess that makes them sound backwards, and I don't necessarily mean to imply that, but I do. Yeah. But this is an issue of, like, for me, it's perfectly okay for, say, like, some folks, okay, fine, that's over there, you can believe that, but let me believe what I believe. And they're going to counter that with, no, you can't believe what you believe, that's wrong, and I'm going to leave if that's what we believe. And so I think it is somewhat of in a way, it's a positive step. This is sound weird. This is a positive step that they are now the ones using the language of leaving. Because I would much rather not get kicked out. If there's going to be a split, fine. But I'm not going to be the one that gets kicked out.
Yeah.
Because as far as I'm concerned, they can continue to believe what they believe and be United Methodist. I believe that. I will disagree with them. As I disagree with many United Methodists on many things. Including the existence of hell. Right? Which to me seems like a much more fundamental core doctrinal issue for us to discuss. But, like, there are many United Methodists that I fundamentally disagree with on many levels. But at no point do I look at them and go, you shouldn't be United Methodist. You know what we're really good at being? A big tent.
Yeah.
You know what this is an argument against from their perspective? The end of us being a big tent. And I'm not allowed to be a big tent. I have to become a slightly smaller tent. A tent that is less fabulously decorated. I need a less well-decorated and musically inclined tent.
Are you done with your stereotype?
Just being hilarious. But you get my point. If they want to leave, fine, but I'm not going anywhere. Yeah. Until you absolutely fundamentally pass something that says we can't be a big tent. Mm-hmm. Right now, we're just not really good at being a big tent.
And I think I don't think I've ever heard the big tent argument used for full inclusion. I've only heard it for, like, why we can have progressives and super progressives and super conservatives in the same place.
I don't think we have that many super progressives left.
Okay, well,
we have a lot more.
See, also going elsewhere where fits better. I mean, that's like that's the other thing, that people leave. Lay people, I mean, like, members of churches leave.
An entire generation of people is in the process of leaving.
Right, and that's the other thing I was going to say when you were talking about modern versus postmodern, that if we stay with, like, socially and culturally, we're sort of more of a postmodern worldview, and I think generationally, that's where we are. And I think that not only, because I know that there are younger people involved in Good News,
there are.
But by and large, this is where we are, and so I think to think about the future of the church too.
But I also think, I think, building on what you're saying, I think we're a wonderfully postmodern denomination, and kind of have that in our DNA before it was postmodernism.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's Wesley being contextual. Like, that's what that is.
Because Wesley is a lot of, sure.
We'll
see where this goes.
Yeah,
let's talk about some core tenets. If you want to do it, okay.
And I always got the sense that in being a United Methodist, there were only a couple of things that were non-negotiable.
They're mostly in the Apostles' Creed.
And the ones that I got, and I don't know, this might be an interesting, I don't know if it's a tangent, but is...
Because I'm the only one here that grew up United Methodist.
Yeah. Is
the rest of y'all are transplants.
Yep.
Oh, we're happy to have you. It's lovely. Welcome.
It's a very nice tent.
Thanks. Did you make us a casserole?
I did.
So my understanding of sort of what it's the primacy of grace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that, death and resurrection, whatever that looks like.
In some way, yes. Through Trinity. It's
the Trinity. Although they don't have...
It's not like...
It's not robust. It's Trinitarianism, but it's not necessarily, like, there's not robust.
It's just sign on the Apostles. It really is mostly grace and sign on, like, Wesley's structure of grace and sign on the Apostles' Creed. Yeah. And you're pretty well set.
And that's kind of... And with an emphasis on holiness of heart and life. And everything else feels a little negotiable. And I have to, like... I mean,
we don't have a catechism. We don't have...
No.
Right. We have confirmation and I'm in the middle of teaching a confirmation class. It's a lot of like, you need to take ownership of your faith for yourself. Well, I don't know why confirmation is Midwestern or from Minnesota today, but it is.
You know why?
Why?
You know who does confirmation upright? The Lutherans.
Yeah, okay.
3 years, 2 hours a week, baby.
Jeez Louise. I'm lucky if
This is most certainly true.
Lucky if I get 45 minutes in.
You're gonna be Lutheran or you're gonna leave.
But
Lutherans.
But it is a lot of like,
right
I take great joy in the running gag that wherever 3 or more Methodists are assembled, there will be an argument over the discipline. Because a lot of things are up in the air and a lot of things are able to be debated and we're able to disagree with a lot of things. And basically what is happening is we're being told that on this issue, if you disagree, you're not orthodox.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Which... I find that so insulting.
So to me, it is that
it
is so insulting.
The fact that they don't think that things are changeable here means that they are the ones who should leave.
Yeah.
Fine, go, and I will be sad and mad, and it's bad. But like,
why are you Bobby's mom from Bobby's World?
Yeah,
I don't know when I developed this impression, but I did. It was actually in a Bible study I was in. But like.
Can you undevelop it?
I understand. Like, I will not be pleased with this.
No,
but
it's
fundamentally, I view their stance as incredibly un-Wesleyan. And most of them, as it turns out, most of the leadership of this did not go to Wesleyan seminaries, which is like a super elitist view of this. But it is kind of annoying that I'm being taught Wesleyan theology by a Calvinist. Like, if you're a Calvinist...
I'm being told that you're not Wesleyan Orthodox by
a Calvinist. And, that's wonderful.
You know who wasn't Wesleyan Orthodox? John Calvin.
John Calvin. And you know who Wesley...
who Wesley had his panties in a wad about?
Calvin. And some aspects of Luther.
Mm-hmm.
And he leaned more towards Luther than Calvin, if we want to be really strict about this.
Easy?
So, like, it's okay to be... Like, I'm not saying it's bad to be a Calvinist, but I'm saying that, like, we're fundamentally not... we're not Calvinists. It's just not... It's not in our identity. And so, stop telling me what's orthodox. If you want to be Calvinist orthodox, there are places to do that. And so, maybe I think a split is inevitable, but I hope to pray to God that I'm not the one who has to leave.
Yeah.
Because I am a United Methodist. I agree that not everyone has to think how I do about inclusion. I will argue with them, and I will fight with them until the day they defrock me. But... fundamentally, they can hold those views and we can be in conversation as fellow United Methodists. But the minute you tell me that I cannot hold what I believe and be an Orthodox Methodist, you can leave. Get out.
America.
Go home. Take those toys and leave. You can have the damn buildings that don't care.
Actually, they can't because of a Supreme Court ruling.
I don't think that legally they have an argument about those buildings, but I'll let them have some of them if it means that it facilitates this easy for them to leave. But I'm not going anywhere. Until fundamentally you change the nature of what the United Methodist Church is, which is what they're trying to do, fundamentally. Mm-hmm. That this issue can't change.
But changing the nature of the United Methodist Church involves changing the nature of Wesleyan theology. It involves giving up response to context, and it involves becoming who we are not.
Oh, we're in a really good job of doing that so far.
And that's really disturbing to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because those of us who did find the Methodist Church found it because it was different.
Yes, I grew up
Like,
Church of Christ.
the
and
Methodist
the
Church
Methodist
has
Church
been
is
a
there
refuge
me.
for many a person who grew up with a fundamentalist background, and there is something deeply refreshing and life-giving about being in a place where not everybody has to think exactly the same way, in which you are not told how to view scripture, in which you are given the tools to think about things for yourself. I mean, that, like, no, this is going to sound really overdramatic, but that saved my faith. And if that goes away, we're not ourselves anymore.
But that's why I'm still here, right? I've been a Methodist my whole life, and we've been joking about that, right? But, like, I've been a Methodist my whole life. And one of the things that I cling to as why I am still a Methodist, despite my myriad frustrations, is that very purpose. That things are open for discussion. That I don't have to believe a certain way and be a Methodist. If you want to believe that homosexuality is a sin, fine, yes, of course. I don't think that. I'm basically being told that I can't carry that to its logical conclusion, which is to say to honor homosexual relationships in the holy bonds of matrimony. So, I mean, that's where I am. And what I'm being told by good news is I can't believe that and be Methodist.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not good news. And that's not particularly Methodist to me in what I view as a Wesleyan distinctive, or why I am a Methodist. If you put a gun to my head and ask you, why are you a Methodist? It is because I can agree to disagree with the millions of other people who are Methodists and not be told that I'm going to hell. Right? That I don't have to sign on to every little piece of every little thing.
Or I don't have to sign on to some sort of really entrenched view of scripture. That I feel like that gives up. You're giving up living scripture.
Right.
These are like
Like,
this is big.
John Wesley changed his mind.
All the
Right.
time.
And occasionally, John Wesley would try to cover this by like, I didn't really change my mind. This is consistent. And you read that and go, John, no, try again.
Well, he's not a systematic theologian.
Nope. That's why I like about him. That's what you don't like about him.
I know, it's why he makes me a little crazy.
'cause you're
but
German.
I balance. I
Schweizer.
I'm German. I'm German.
Lutheran, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, who is this John Wesley? I do not like him.
I do not like. He's not systematic.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Bring me Zwingli.
Zwingli.
Zwingli wasn't a systematic
Was
theologian.
not systematic.
And our
and neither
producer
was-
is saying we're tangenting in. Wrap it
Is
up,
that the,
kids.
like, International Symbol for Bunny Trail?
Yes.
But I don't know. I was going to say something profound and then I forgot.
Yeah, story of my life. But it is probably time for us to get out of here.
Really
When
good
we
time.
start making Zwingli jokes, yes, it's
Yeah,
time
it's
for us to
probably
go to
time.
bed.
So, I mean, as I seem to say at the end of almost every show, this is an issue that we can settle in this conversation. But I want the rhetoric change on the part of Good News is big. And the amount of escalation that they are finding ways not just to threaten leaving, but find ways that they can take their stuff with them. And I think that is something for us to think about and to pray about as we go forward. If you have any feedback or want to share kind of your thoughts on, where the church is going and if a split is inevitable, email us, synboldly@nfear.org. Post to our Facebook, the Sign Your Name, facebook.com/the Sign Your Name Project, or tweet us at synboldly on Twitter, and we'll read it on the air next week. And we can, if you send stuff in, we can have a section for feedback. Because I think, we want to hear multiple opinions on this.
Our tent is big.
Our tent
here.
is big.
Our tent is big.
And there are casseroles.
And there are casseroles. And if you disagree with us, please write in. And I want to have that discussion. If you're local in Atlanta, we can have you into the studio. We can make that happen. Also, I want to plug a couple things that we've been doing lately. There are a whole bunch of sermons up on Trey's Sermon of the Week. And Stephen Splains, our new weekly video show. where Stephen explains a news topic. Has been doing really well. We've got 4 episodes up so far, so check that out.
200 million views.
200 million views, not really. 100 million imaginary views in Stephen's head. But check that out. It's up on the website. It's up on the Facebook page. It's also, if you search Stephen Explains on YouTube, you should find it. And with that, I've plugged enough things. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord, and end fear by signing your name. Good night.
Hey Kathleen.
Hey, Steven.
What do you call the group of conservative Methodist cats?
I don't know, Steven. What do you call the group of conservative Methodist
The
cats?
Good Muse Foundation.
I want to die.
What do you think about that Sin-Boldy cat?
He is passed out from the pain of that joke.
Your bad joke killed the cat.
He's annoying, gets in my way, but I love that cat.